Donald Trump is smashing a gang.
The epidemic of left-wing violence and Antifa-inspired terror has been escalating for nearly a decade. At universities, Antifa has organized riotous mobs to attack campus speakers. I see it all the time. And these are agitators, anarchists, and they're paid. But they have been very threatening to people, but we're going to be very threatening to them, far more threatening to them than they ever were with us, and that includes the people that fund them.
So that was a long hearing, actually, today in the White House. Now, of course, Antifa, you'll know who they are, although they are a very amorphous mob. They turn up at protests. They wear black, they cover up their faces, they say they are anti-fascists, but are, ironically, rather violent. We have them in the UK, of course, too, but they're not as prominent as in America. So the president has already designated them a terrorist organisation, just like Sir Keir Starmer prescribed Palestine action. Well, today, the president promised to smash the gang, unlike our own Prime Minister and his promise to do the same thing. He hosted a number of journalists who told of some of their experiences with the thugs, and I'm delighted to say that one of them in the room, who you heard at the end, was the Discovery Institute's Jonathan Cho. And Jonathan joins me now in the studio. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely.
How was it? What was the atmosphere like in the room this afternoon?
Well, it was historic, to say the least, but among the independent journalists, and I want to make that very clear, we're not talking about legacy media members. We're talking about the independents who have been covering the front lines of Antifa in places like Seattle, Portland, and all along the West Coast. I think among the journalists, we were just thankful that President Trump simply acknowledged that Antifa is absolutely real. They are a domestic terrorist organization, and they have been causing chaos and mayhem in American cities. And in many cases, they've been functioning as the muscle for other very progressive and far left groups.
They are different. I use the word amorphous, though, because there's no clear leader. We don't know their funding structure. We don't know, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. You'll know more about it than I do. Do we know how they communicate with each other? Do we know how organized they are?
Well, I think that's been the problem for so long, right? I mean, you've had a lot of the Democratic officials when they were in power and many in U.S. states saying that Antifa is just an idea. It doesn't exist. So that's been problematic. So finally, this year, President Trump acknowledging that Antifa is very real, that helps. That's the first step. But then the next step is to acknowledge that they're also very decentralized. And the way they work is they used, crowdfunding in many cases, mutual aid, what we call here in the States, where people just donate to their cause because they believe in it. And then that's how they stay off the grid. But what we've discovered through our own research is that Antifa is also getting indirectly funded through U.S. taxpayers, because a lot of the nonprofits in the homeless and housing sectors, as we're going to reveal, and we passed this research onto the Trump administration, what's happening is that Antifa is being brought along. Again, in many cases, for example, a group like Stop the Sweeps, they're there to get in front of the police when they're moving these encampments in U.S. cities where they're prevalent in places like, again, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And they're being brought in to enforce and also to cause a crisis. And that's how Antifa has been so successful, and that's also how they're getting funded.
Because they're professional agitators.
Yes.
In many ways, aren't they? And it's often, and I've seen it, I've been at protests in London, we had the Freedom March, we've had various patriotic events, and suddenly there is a masked group that will appear seemingly out of nowhere, and the police will treat them differently somehow to the other protesters. They seem to get away with a lot, and it's always been a little bit mysterious to those of us, who work in the media, but even just stood there as an observer wondering, where do they come from? Does Trump want to get to the bottom of that and literally, metaphorically, demask these dangerous people?
Yeah, absolutely. As you brought up, from outing and cutting off the funding source to also targeting some of these nonprofits supporting Antifa, that's what the president's going to go after. But what really came out today that was refreshing for a lot of the independent journalists is that President Trump heavily criticized mainstream media for failing to tell the entire story. And that's how the American public has really not been getting all of the details into what Antifa is about. And I really believe that we're in an information war right now, right? It's the independents, conservative media who are trying to show what's happening on the front lines, like the video that you showed your audience earlier this evening. But then if you look at mainstream media, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, you don't see any of this stuff.
I think part of the problem, though, Jonathan, is in the language that we use around this issue, because Antifa seem to think, like I said in my introduction, about the fact they have a monopoly on what is right and what is good. They are anti-fascist. They would consider themselves to be anti-racism. They consider themselves to be anti-hate. And somehow we have to find the words to describe what they actually are as opposed to what they are not.
Right. I mean, and, you know, at the end of the day, you know, Antifa doesn't have, you know, a club where you can just sign up online and you get a membership card. It doesn't work that way. However, by all accounts, and based on my own personal reporting and talking to other journalists over the past few years, Antifa ultimately wants to destabilize America. They hate capitalism, and essentially they want to usher in a violent revolution to upend the United States. And
the UK.
That's what we're seeing. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why there's so much violence and mayhem behind this group.
Yeah. Is it a happy day then, Jonathan? It's a happy day.
It's a start.
Yeah, it's a start. But to have the president, to recognise them, to give you the time this afternoon, I thought, and to listen to all the journalists there in the room, I thought it was remarkable.
Unprecedented, a big deal, and it's energized us to keep on going.
Good. Right. Great to see you. Thank you so much, Jonathan Cho there from the Discovery Institute. OK, let's also, on this same story, get the take of journalist Jack Hadfield. Jack, a very good evening to you. Thank you for joining me here on The Late Show Live. Now, this isn't a problem that is confined to America. How did you feel seeing this hearing, acknowledging that Antifa is an organisation in that room of very influential people? I, for one, was utterly heartened by it.
No, I've been exactly the same. You know, I've seen the behavior that Antifa have done, both in over there where you guys are in the US and back home here in Britain. You know, when I was just 19, I was attacked by Antifa thugs the day after Brexit in a park in Whitechapel, and the police blamed us for being there, for being independent journalists and filming. At some of the recent counter demonstrations to the asylum hotel protests, for example, at the Thistle City Hotel in the Barbican just a couple of months ago, Antifa rocked up there as well, along with Stand Up to Racism, and Antifa went and fought the police, because that's what they do, because they are violent street thugs, and we know that they're organized. You know, as Joe pointed out, that you know, there is no obviously specific, there's no president of Antifa, for example, but they operate in cells, and terrorist organizations like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, also operate in cells. They operate exactly the same way. So for the left, who have been saying for ages that, oh, you can't do anything about Antifa because it's not a real organization, well, we've prescribed groups that look just like them much earlier. So yes, I'm very, very heartened to see that there's actually action being taken on this topic finally.
Jack, I'm fascinated about, like I say, about the language around this issue, because Antifa sounds like it's something that they had called themselves. But obviously this is just a kind of nickname, effectively, that's been given to them by other people. I think part of their power is in the fact that they're very difficult to describe, because there is no clear leader. That's why they cover up their faces all the time. They're very decentralized as an organization, and I guess what we would have originally called them is maybe the anti-capitalists. I'm thinking about, I mean, they gained prominence, really, didn't they, in about the 2010s as an entity, Antifa. But were they originally what we would have considered to be the anti-capitalists?
Yes, that's true. I mean, you'll have seen Antifa and others be involved, for example, in the Occupy Wall Street movements around in 2011 or so. But they have had their history, you know, they will trace themselves back to Germany in the 1920s, 1930s. They will trace their heritage to these communist groups that were there in Europe at the time, and then have existed really for most of the 20th century. But they've been more under the radar for those who haven't seen them. As I said, they certainly have had a lot more prominence within the last decade. I can remember very well when I was at university seeing all these stories of what was happening in the States where, for example, somebody, say, like Milo Yiannopoulos would turn up to speak at a campus and Antifa would turn out and have a riot there. There was, of course, the March for Trump in 2017, a massive clash between patriots and Antifa there as well. So they really have been getting into more prominence over the last decade. Obviously, they were involved in the Summer of Love in 2020 with BLM. And as Joe mentioned, these groups are supported by normal sort of moderate progressive sort of left-wing organizations. Even if you're not giving them money, you'll see, for example, there was an employee for one left-wing group who was caught on camera giving out weapons to BLM and Antifa rioters. And these people have links to all the same sort of deep state NGO, woke funding stuff that's going on there. So even if these people aren't giving them literal financial help, they'll certainly be giving them material help, and you will never, ever see anybody say, like George Soros, come out here and condemn Antifa violence.
Interesting. Yeah, Donald Trump named George Soros recently, didn't he? Somebody wants to take a look at. He might get pulled into this vortex of clamping down on Antifa. Remains to be seen. Thank you so much, journalist Jack Hadfield there. Let's go back to our breaking news. My guests are in the studio this evening, Greg Swenson and Eric Ham. Delighted to see you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Eric, you came back. Well done. I see you often, Greg. Great to see you, but never normally in America.
First time.
Wonderful.
First time
Thank you. But I'm sure you've both just heard this incredible breaking news, actually. The president has said that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of his peace plan. So we think this was the moment we saw this afternoon. We might just play it for you again. Greg, do you think this is what happened when Marco Rubio passed him a piece of paper today and he nodded?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like something that Marco would do. And they always want to give the president the credit, right? So Marco Rubio might have been doing the heavy lifting, or Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner, but of course I think ultimately the president likes to make the announcement, and so I think it's a bit of a teaser. We don't really know the detail yet, but it sounds like it's coming. It sounds like we're close.
Your reaction, Eric?
I think it's welcome news, but again, I think we do need to see it actually come together. Is there an actual deal? And of course, the devil in the details. And more importantly, do they actually get those hostages back?
Yeah.
That's so important.
Yeah, if you're a hostage family tonight, you will be a family of a hostage. You will be feeling, I imagine, extremely optimistic, but extremely cautious at the same time.
Hopeful.
Until you have your loved ones back in your house, you are not going to relax.
They've gone through this before.
Let's also then talk about this other big story today from Washington. Antifa recognised, put in the spotlight by the president. We've heard from one of the people who was there this afternoon as a witness. We're going to have another one in a little later, somebody who was actually physically attacked by Antifa, a journalist. Your assessment of it, Eric? What do you think's going on here? You look a little bit cynical. You got a bit sceptical look on your face to me.
Because I'm confused. Like, what is Antifa? Who is Antifa? It just seems oftentimes when we say Antifa, it's almost as if when the president says Antifa, he's talking about an actual person or an actual organization, whereas it's really just an ideology, but he likes to say Antifa, Antifa, Antifa. But we still don't know, and I think we've had this conversation already. I share
your confusion on this, but aren't you heartened that he's going to try and find out the people behind the masks?
No, because again, when you say Antifa, and I think with the president, like everything, he's made it an issue of left or right, and then somehow they're the enemy. As if they have done a lot of damage, or as if they're terrorists, because that's what he's attempting to do, to categorize and organize.
Well, he has prescribed them as a terrorist
an ideology as terrorism. But I don't know if you can actually organize an idea as terrorism. Terrorism is an act. And I don't think when you see people carrying out these acts, I don't think they're doing it because, again, Antifa, what does Antifa mean? Well, it's anti-fascist.
Anti-fascist.
So they're against fascism. And I don't think we're necessarily categorizing people who are doing bad things or labeling people in the right way, because those are terrorists, not necessarily Antifa.
Greg,
Well,
I share some of this confusion as well, but this is why I say the language of this is really important, and partly because we've had our own Prime Minister talking about people going out on the streets as being far right. And so the waters are so muddied on the semantics, and it's so important.
Yeah, I think, look, whenever someone does something unpleasant in the UK, Keir Starmer or his lot will say it's the far right. And it's not far right to say that, we're upset that illegal migrants are coming over on rafts and then staying in hotels and getting, free mobile phones and free food. That's not far right. That's just common sense. And I think if you look at Antifa, they beat the hell out of Andy Ngo twice, almost to death twice.
Well, Andy we're going to be talking to later in the show.
Glad. He's a friend of mine, and I know he's a friend of the GB News. And so it was great to see him in the White House today, because he's gone through so much, and just to have that opportunity to be in the Oval Office or in the White House with the president was a great day for him.
So your reservation is what? That Donald Trump is somehow politicizing this issue with a left versus right prism, through a prism, and therefore causing more division. Does it matter if he catches the bad guys who won't show us their faces?
Oh, look, if there are people who are acting as terrorists in the name of Antifa, then I think the president has every right, and I think we should applaud the president for going after people who engage in terrorism using a political ideology.
And violence.
But I think also we need to be careful to recognize that there are people who are on both sides doing this. And I also think we have to be careful, because people who are demonstrating in Chicago right now are not, or may be, Antifa, but that does not necessarily make them violent, and it does not make them terrorists. There are people who are demonstrating in Portland, Oregon right now who are not Antifa, but then there are people there who are engaged in violent activities who also may not be Antifa. So I think there's a lot of gray in what the president is attempting to do, but he's making it black and white, and I think that's where it becomes problematic.
Collectively, Antifa is not quite as organized as other terrorist organizations, but it is a bunch of loosely defined groups here in America, always behind the mostly peaceful protests. I thought that was amusing back in 2020. When they say it's mostly peaceful protests. In Chicago right now, 4 Antifa cars, whether they're Antifa or not, but they likely are, surrounding ICE agents and threatening ICE agents, putting bounties on ICE agents. That was done recently, and from a trend.
No, that was an actual gang. Yeah, that was not Antifa. That was an actual street gang that actually did that. So I think we need to be clear about that.
So it's either street gangs or TDA from Venezuela, or Antifa, or maybe a mix of all of the above. But there's crime happening in Chicago, and I know because I live there. So
your worry then, Eric, is that somehow this will be a label that will be placed upon somebody who might happen to hold anti-capitalist views, for instance, or anti-Trump views, or anti-border control views. They'd be slapped with the label of you are Antifa, and therefore you're a terrorist, and therefore you're going to jail.
Exactly. I can be Antifa. Please, no one come arrest me. I can be Antifa, but that does not mean that I am attacking ICE agents. That does not even mean that I am out demonstrating. But that does not also mean that I should be targeted by Donald Trump's Homeland Security or National Guardsmen because I actually agree with the idea of what Antifa stands for.
And do you know what this makes me think, Greg? This is just making me think about the situation in the UK where Keir Starmer has looked at people, as you say, who might go with a placard outside a migrant hotel. And he has stamped the label of the equivalent, which is you are far right. And I think Donald Trump is just almost reacting in a sense. He's like, no, we've had it for too long. We are sick of the political right being labelled as something that we're not. I'm going to do it back to you. Now, you're saying 2 wrongs don't make a right. But something has to be done about these professional agitators. We saw them in New York last night with Ben Leo. They've always got their faces covered. They don't want to be seen. And I think I, for one, applaud the ambition, even if it needs to be flushed out a little bit more as to who these people actually are.
Yeah, and they don't get enough pushback from many of the politicians on the left in this country. They don't get criticized, and they should. And then back to the UK, it's if you protest outside of a migrant hotel, you go to jail. If you put up a sign on Big Ben that says from the river to the sea, that's okay. That's public. That's exercising your right to protest. So there's definitely two-tiered justice in the UK. That's for sure. We don't want to see it here.
Do you have this phrase two-tier justice in America?
Something we do.
Does it exist?
Does two-tier justice exist?
Yeah.
I think some people might say that it does.
Because if you ask any Brit right now, they'll tell you, yes, it absolutely does. But anyway, we've got an hour and 45 minutes, fellas, to dig down into much more of this. So stay with me. Keep your messages coming, won't you? gbnews.com/your say.